Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Politics Matters podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Jakubowski, and today we've got quite an interesting episode for you guys. We're going to be talking about the UK elections coming up. We're going to be talking about some House elections as well.
And so, since I could not cover the UK all on my own, we've got my good friend and friend of the show, Arthur Garton, on to talk about this election. He is British, he's from the UK, so he's going to be here as our local expert on these elections. So, Arthur, how's it been going, man?
It's been going well, Ryan. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad you're here. So we're going to be starting off with some UK stuff. And so I'm American, and uh, look, okay, I'm going to try my best to stay on this, but Arthur's going to know way more than I am anyways, so we're just going to kind of go right ahead and just say, Arthur, what do you think the best comparison for these UK elections would be to a fellow American like myself who isn't well versed in British politics?
Well, I often see the comparisons to the midterms, but I don't think it's quite one for one because our elections here in the UK are all local this year, and every year that's not a general election, nothing really affects what happens at the parliamentary level except for by-elections, which there may be one coming up soon. So these are all real local elections. So I would compare them to maybe more of the city or in some states county level seats or whatever council seats are up. But I wouldn't really compare them particularly to, say, a state legislature or the House or the Senate or anything like that. However, there were not up this year, but up last year, funnily enough, were a new sort of form of devolvement called metro mayors, which was sort of similar-ish to the role of the governor over in the US. So they control things such as sort of roads or libraries or council tax service or like state tax. But they've not been implemented everywhere. They've only really been tried in a select few areas, but they have been fairly successful. And then there are a few mayoral elections up this year in different boroughs of London, but they aren't quite as large scale as the metro mayor elections.
Okay, so then I guess another parallel I'll draw here for my American viewers is obviously the Tories are down in the polls. Boris Johnson is not at a popular point in his him being prime minister, and we've seen a lot of gains for Labour, the Greens, and the Lib Dems. Do you think that, and obviously in America we say the generic ballot or the national environment is R plus whatever or something. Uh, what's the environment in the UK, just broadly speaking, that we're looking at heading into these elections?
Well, I think that the environment's definitely Labour leaning, but I don't think that it's quite as Labour leaning as maybe the polls suggest, just because these elections are on local issues and in quite a few areas. Croydon's a good example, which is a Labour run area, but the Tories are actually poised to make gains because the Labour run council there has faced some financial issues and the government has had to step in and help them from things like bankruptcy. So it's not always a one-to-one, but I definitely think that maybe the local election results paint a brighter picture for the Tories at the national level. But then again, I still don't think that this set of elections will be particularly good for them. I think you're still looking at quite damaging losses, just maybe not as many as the polls suggest.
Okay, so then in that case, so as you mentioned, we had elections in 2021. I want to say on it was May 6th, wasn't it?
Off the top of my head, it was a further. Yeah, I think it was May 6th.
Yeah.
It's
So
May
we
the
had
5th this year.
so we had elections around this time last year, and they were pretty similar. But obviously, the United Kingdom is now much more favorable to the Labour Party and less favorable to the Conservatives than they were a year ago. How drastic is that change going to be in your eyes?
I don't think it will be as drastic as maybe it was last year, because last year there were a lot more seats up, because not only did you have the council elections that would have been up in 2021, but we had our local elections from 2020 also delayed. So you sort of had two sets of local elections in one. And so that really helped the Tories if they had a good night, because they're effectively having two sets of really, really good elections. And that meant that ultimately they'd gain more seats. Whereas this time, the amount of seats are up because in some councils they'd be up sort of every year, but they'd have 3 councillors up, 1 elected each year, and they'd go like that. But there's ultimately just a lot less seats up this year. So even if the Tories do have a really bad night, they're not losing as many as they would say with the set that were up in 2019 or even the set that were up last year. You'd see maybe even double, triple the losses just because of how many more seats are up.
Okay. So what you're just, I guess, to recap or to corroborate, you're saying that Labor are going to gain and the Conservatives are going to lose, but we might not see it at A. You think that the polls are overshooting the Labor support by a little bit, and B, there just aren't enough elections up to like have like this major wave, right?
Yeah. And also because when these seats were last up 2018, it was sort of the post 2017 Corbyn boom. Labour did okay in the polls. In fact, the results, if you're talking about the generic ballot, it was even. And so, Labour have got, I suppose, a lot less to gain because they did gain quite a lot last time. And as I mentioned, with a lot of the seats that are up in thirds, if you take all of the seats that were Labour loses last year, but they have seats up this year, they lost all of those, they'd lose 169 seats. And while I don't think that they'd lose even half of those seats, even putting maybe like a 60, 70 seat loss from those typically red wall seats puts them at a disadvantage. In London, I suppose they'd gain more than enough to turn that into a net, but it wouldn't be as much as say back in the 90s where they were gaining hundreds up to 1,000 and even in some cases more council seats in one.
So then I guess the next question would be, I was going to bring it up anyways, so thanks for bringing it up. The red wall. So a lot of people talk about a global realignment. And so obviously what that means is that the richer or suburban are just seats inside of London that are college educated and socially liberal, but have more Tory tendencies on fiscal policy or whatever. Those seats are expected to trend to the left, towards Labour, towards whatever. And then the working class, traditionally Labour areas like the Red Wall are expected to become more conservative. So what do you think we're going to see with the global realignment in terms of this election specifically?
Well, I don't think that this election specifically is going to see too much of the continuation of the realignment in the Red Wall per se, because the Tories did just so well there last time. So you may see Tories gain a little bit in areas like Warsaw, Bolton, maybe Burnley, but I can't see them, particularly at the end of the night, looking through all of those councils, which are per se red wall, and seeing a massive gain for the Tories. You'll see probably a few, and I think that overall, if you take into consideration all of those red wall councils that are up this year, which doesn't cover the entire red wall, but it covers quite a lot of it, you'll probably see Tory gains. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Labour made a small net gain, or if you saw maybe both of them lose a little bit and the Lib Dems or Independents gain a few seats. But I think it, compared to the past few local elections, it won't be as large a swing. Even in 2019, which was by all accounts horrific year at the local level for Tories, that the local elections took place in the May, and the general election took place under Boris Johnson in the winter in December. But even as they saw massive losses in the southwest and in the east, they still gained seats in a lot of the red wall, or what would come to be red wall councils, in the West Midlands and in the northwest. I know they picked up Walsall Council there. They picked up Northeast Lincolnshire Council, which was where Grimsby was. So there were still some symbolic victories for them that would foreshadow the landslide win that they'd get at the general election.
Wandsworth is the council with Putney in it. And so that, I think, is a good example of seats in London that could trend a little towards or shift against the Conservatives. What, like, in terms of London specifically, how bad is it going to be for the Tories? And how bad does it look for them right now in terms of polling?
I think in London specifically, it does look particularly grim. I mean, there's a poll out today at the time of recording from YouGov that had them down 27 points to Labour, which was a 12-point shift towards Labour from 2018, or as we say, a 6-point swing from the Conservatives to Labour. And on those numbers, Wandsworth, which is Putney, Battersea, and Tooting, which are 3 seats that have moved, even in 2019, swung towards Labour. Putney was their only flip in the entire country. I think Wandsworth is a definite flip. I mean, if we're going to use American ratings, I'd probably even rate that at this point likely Labour. They won the popular vote there last time by 0.4, I think. They've got to win, I think, 4 seats to flip the council. It's definitely doable, and I'd say it's pretty likely. Now, another council that I'd say is particularly interesting is Barnet, because that was a council that Labour were trying to target in 2018. They thought that they had a pretty good chance of winning it. However, one thing that was interesting is that Barnet has a very high Jewish population, and of course, Corbyn wasn't the most popular with the Jews. I think that was pretty well documented. And so I think Labour needed to gain 2 seats to flip Barnet, and they ended up actually losing 5. And this year, I think from what I know from people on the ground in Barnet is that Labour are a lot more bullish. They're winning voters who did vote, or used to vote Labour and voted Conservative in 2018, and they think they're winning them back. Whether that's enough to flip the council, I'm not sure yet. I'd say it's probably a toss-up, although sort of gun to head moment, I'd say Labour do flip it. And then there are 2 other Tory-held councils that I think on a really, really bad night, and this 27-point gap, if it were to play out, would make Westminster Council, which is Cities of London and Westminster, and I think also Westminster North constituencies make up that council. That's been Tory for a very, very, very long time. They currently hold, I think, 41 or 40 to 20. And so Labour winning that, they'd need to flip a lot of seats. But I think on a night where Labour winning 20 or by 27 points citywide, that seems possible. And then the other council that I'd think on a sort of tsunami watch would be Hillingdon, which is the council, funnily enough, with Uxbridge and South Ruislip in. And for viewers that are familiar with that area, it's Boris Johnson's seat. And so I think it would be really symbolic if Labour ended up picking up the council in which Boris Johnson's seat resides in. But I think there are still bright spots for Tories in London. Harrow, they've made a real sort of target of, and I think that while I believe Labour are favoured there, they'd probably, on a good night for the Tories, they'd probably pick that up. Although if I were to rate that by using the American system, I'd probably say lean Labour. Croydon, I'd say they've got a very, very good chance of winning because of the issues that have surrounded the council there. I'd probably rate that as a toss-up, but I do believe that unless they're having a really bad night, they'd be gaining seats there. And also, interestingly, Sutton, which isn't a seat where Labour play much of a hold, but it's the Lib Dem versus Tory council. Traditionally Lib Dem, but it also backed Brexit and has been trending towards the Conservatives a lot recently. I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe didn't take the council from the Liberal Democrats because there are a few independents, but shifted it into no overall control. So they gained enough seats from the Liberal Democrats to maybe do a deal with the independents, so that they could take control of the council, but they wouldn't have a majority by themselves.
So it would essentially it would essentially be like a minority government in which they formed a coalition.
Yeah. Basically.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then we're gonna wrap this segment up. I do have one last question though, which is, I know you might not have a margin right now, but if I made you give me a margin, how much does Labour win London by citywide? How much do they win London by, and why do you come to that number?
I'd say that it's less than the 27 that YouGov's suggesting. I'd maybe say low 20s. I think there'll definitely be a swing towards Labour from 2018, but I don't think it'll be as much as they're suggesting. Maybe something around 22, 23-point win, which would still be a really, really solid result for Labour, and it's indicative of the national environment. Moving towards Labour, even from the even environment of 2018, and sort of just the disproportionate trend towards Labour that's been happening for the past decade or even longer, really, in London.
Okay. Thank you very much for your help with that segment. Again, Arthur did most of the talking there because he obviously is way more qualified to talk on. Hey, I appreciate it. He's way more qualified to talk about UK than I am because I'm like, I'm American, so naturally I'm just not allowed to have knowledge of anything outside my borders. So, we're gonna. It's unfortunate. It's really sad. We're gonna move on to with stuff which is in my borders, the U.S. House. So for those of you who don't know, my current forecast has the Democrats at 201 total seats. I'm assuming that they get 21 out of the New York map. That's a generous estimate because I'm doing no toss-ups and there are going to be a few toss-ups if they end up losing. So, 201 is generous. It's probably, realistically, it's probably 199 or 200, but functionally, I'm going to say 201. So then you've got New York. We don't know how many toss-ups there are going to be. Without New York, you've got 15 toss-ups, and I'm assuming there's one that they draw in New Hampshire. That's close enough to a toss-up anyways. So 14 for sure toss-ups, one in New Hampshire. Just for fun, I guess I'll say two in New York, which will get you to 17. And then the GOP were at 217 before New York, but they're probably going to get to that 219 or 220 mark with New York. So at that point, they're probably past the majority, barely in my forecast. So just to be safe on New York, because there are either going to be 26 total seats there, I'll say Democrats would be favored in 19 or 20 of them. GOP would win 4, and then you'd have 2 or 3 toss-ups. But for now, I'll say functionally GOP have a majority at 219, 220, that range. Arthur, what's your forecast at right now?
So with New York, New Hampshire, Missouri, and Kansas unrated, I have the Republicans at 204 seats and the Democrats at 177, with 14 that I have rated as toss-up.
Cool. So we're pretty similar. We can look at we can't physically look at our maps on the podcast right now, but so in terms of the seats that you're looking at that are going to be competitive, so you got 14 toss-ups, I've got 15. When you're looking at the seats that are likely to be a toss-up or that are toss-ups in our eyes, you've got a mix of suburban seats, a mix of generally Democratically leaning Hispanic seats, and then you've got a few in the Midwest, specifically in Illinois and Michigan, as well as one in Ohio. So, yeah, we're going to just kind of work our way through here. So, what are your thoughts on Valadeo in the 22nd of California, and then Garcia in the 27th?
I think starting with Valadeo in the 22nd, I think that's really a clash of the Titans. I think both him and Rudy Salas are really, really strong candidates. I think that is going to be the closest race in California. I think it's going to be closer than Porter's race, Steele's race, and even Levin and Garcia's races. I think that's a place where maybe in the jungle primary you see Valadeo have a quite a large lead, and then Salas maybe claws a bit back in the general. I think it's going to be a seat where Hispanic turnout is going to be down quite a lot in 2022, particularly in the Central Valley region of California, and I think that hurts Salas. But then again, he's shown in the state assembly to have quite a lot of crossover appeal from Republicans, alongside Adam Gray, who's running in the 13th to the north, which I have currently rated as lean Democrat. I think if I were to choose who wins that, I think Valadeo wins it. But again, it's California, it's the House in a midterm, seats flip that people don't think should flip, and seats hold that people don't think should hold. I know 2018 had quite a lot of flips, such as the 48th and the 39th that people didn't really expect, or some people didn't expect. Maybe more bullish Dems did, but yeah. I think for the 27th, I think a similar thing. I think that Garcia actually wins. I don't think that Christy Smith's particularly put up a strong challenge to Garcia this time around, and I think out of the seats I have rated as toss-up, that's probably one of the ones that falls into Lena the quickest. But it is also like a Biden plus 13 seat in a Dem state with jungle primary, and you could see DVD in some of the top races, such as the Senate. I don't think it will happen at the gubernatorial level, but you could see a DVD Senate race, which would hamper turnout for Republicans. But I think Garcia has the edge.
Yeah, I agree with both. I think the Republicans take both. Like the Valadao on the 22nd. So this is coming from a guy who had Valadao losing to Cox, and I think it has like a lean Dion election day or whatever. But so the issue with this seat, I think, for Democrats is that when you're looking at the Central Valley, their coalition relies a lot on rural Hispanics turning out, and they're 0 for 2 there. Like that's like they're taking 2 L's really because A, rural Hispanic turnout, like you said, is going to be down, and B, it's shifting right anyways. So it's kind of like this seat's not great for Democrats. Wouldn't be stunned if Rudy Salas wins, but like you're looking at a seat in which the Democrats are probably going to take a major hit. So now we're going to move on to a seat that I know you hold very dearly. Just kidding. New Mexico 2nd. What do you got there?
I have it as lean Republican. I don't have it as a toss-up. As much as I think that Harrell isn't the strongest incumbent, it is a Hispanic seat, or a seat where Democrats rely primarily on Hispanic turnout in a midterm. I think Gabe Vasquez is a decent recruit for Democrats, but he's certainly not top tier. He didn't raise a whole bunch of money. I think it's only sort of $300K, which isn't bad, but if you're really challenging an incumbent in a midterm year in a seat where you've got to make up and turn out a lot of voters, I don't think it's going to be quite enough. I could be wrong, of course, but I think that's really a seat that Democrats could challenge more in 2024. I look at State Senator Sarah Correa Hemphill, who represents Silver City. She primaried successfully an incumbent there and then ran and overperformed Biden in a real sort of toss-up race. I think Biden only carries the seat by 2. I think that she's probably going to be a stronger challenger to Harrell in 2024. I mean, you could also see maybe somebody like Nathan Small or as my Twitter name, Xochitl Torres Small, run. And I think either of them would pose a pretty strong challenge to Yvette Harrell. But as for 2022, I think that seat remains red.
So I'm gonna disagree. I don't like it. It's by no means lean D or safe or anything. I think the seat's a toss-up, and I wouldn't be stunned if this is like the random Hispanic seat the Democrats win, because out of the California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico region, in terms of those seats that have substantial Hispanic voting blocks, the seat seems the most favorable to Democrats for me. So you've got Harrell, who is a pretty Trumpy incumbent who underperformed him in 2020. And I get he ran against Torres Small. She got out front race. Torres Small was the incumbent, and that race was a toss up in most people's minds. And when she won by she won by 7, right?
8, I think.
Okay, yeah. So she won by 8. And so that was a pretty impressive victory, but she still underperformed Trump. It was still a double-digit Trump seat anyways. And so with it being redistricted to becoming a Biden plus 6 seat, I'm pretty optimistic for Democrats here. And I say that because when you look at a seat in, Southern California that trended right in terms of Asian and Hispanic voters in 2020, New Mexico 2nd is not exactly comparable to that, because you're looking at a seat that didn't move at all from 2016 to 2020. There it was Clinton plus 6, Biden plus 6, didn't really change. And that was with Biden's collapse in nearby Texas with rural Hispanics. And so it being Biden plus 6 gives the Democrats enough wiggle room here, and that I think they can win it narrowly. If it was like anything left, if it was like Biden plus 4, I'd be leading Republican. But I'm going to go with toss up here because I wouldn't be stunned if this is the seat the Democrats win out of all the ones they lose with demographics like this. But yeah, again, functionally a toss up. Maybe give the Democrats the edge here, but they drew it. They probably were confident enough that they could contest it in a serious manner, and so that's what I think we're looking at right here. So while we're on the topic of rural Hispanic seats, so first, actually, I know that you care a lot about this primary, so I'll let you talk about the primary. The 28th in Texas between Henry Cuellar, who's the Blue Dog incumbent Democrat, who had a scandal in, I think, January, where the FBI raided his house. And then you've got the progressive challenger, Jess Cisneros, who tried to challenge him in 2020, lost that primary back for round two. So I know you're more of a Cisneros fan than Cuellar, but who do you objectively think wins that primary, and what do the margins look like in the general?
Well, I think first of all, it really is the toss up to end all toss ups. You've got a toss up for the Dem primary, and then you've got the toss up general. Now, while I do think that Cisneros is my preferred candidate, and I think that she does have the slight edge in the primary. First of all, she outraised Cuellar by like 2-1. And money in a market such as the 28th, where it is cheap, and in a primary, it is all about turning out those Hispanic voters. Her goal is pretty simple for the primary, which is just turn out as many people in San Antonio as you can. That was a county that, of all, I think it had the lowest turnout as a percentage. While Cuellar in the rural counties towards the south and in Webb County, which is where Laredo is, managed to get pretty decent turnout and also crossover from Republicans. Now there's a debate on ET whether those people are Republicans. I ultimately think that they are, and I think that the trends that Republicans have made within the South Texas rural counties are permanent, and I think they're going to continue. So I think that she has a slight edge in the runoff because her goal is simpler. She's raised more money. Also, a reason why there was a lot of or an increased turnout compared to San Antonio in the rural counties was because they had a lot of local races going on, which the turnout there ultimately helped Cuellar at the top of the ticket. But in a general, I think both can win. I think that if Cuellar wins the primary, I'd look at moving this seat back to lean D. Whereas if Cisneros wins, I think ultimately, while I don't think that she is as weak as many are saying that she is on ET, I don't think that she is particularly proven. I do think that it is a toss up, and I think when you factor into the matter, the national environment, I can definitely see her losing. Whether I think that gun to the head she loses, I'm not convinced yet. I think that I'd give her the benefit of the doubt because it is bluer down ballot because she's had such a strong financing and ground game, but you can definitely see, I think if the environment gets even a point worse for Democrats than it currently is, then yeah, that's a seat that's probably flipping.
Yeah, I agree. I've got it as a toss-up. Like you said, so the primary briefly, I think Cuellar's got the edge here. Cisneros' path is way simpler, and I wouldn't be stunned if she comes out and wins by even a decent amount, because if she funnels money into San Antonio, she'll do fine. But I think that I really thought I said this on March 1st, I said her chance to win was, before the runoff, getting a majority. She didn't get the majority. She came close. She didn't get the majority. And so I just don't see the youth turnout being there as much as it was on March 1st when you had primaries across the state. And so that's what I think drowns her in this race. But I could be wrong. Again, primaries are really hard to predict. Obviously, I got the Ohio 11 primary wrong last year. I was decently confident Nina Turner was going to win. She lost by 6. So, it's primaries are tough. Wouldn't be surprised if I get this one wrong too. But General Cuellar and Cisneros, I think they both lose. Cisneros probably loses by 5 or 6. Cuellar probably loses by a point or so. Again, I might be overstating how weak Cisneros is, but I just think Democrats have been ostracized from Southern Texas, and this is a seat where that's pretty apparent. And I don't think Cuellar nor Cisneros can fix that, but Cisneros, I think, would more so exacerbate that than Cuellar. So next seat, Illinois 17. It's a seat that is very white, very reliant on turnout from Democratic groups of the past to win. It's still a Biden +8 seat, though, and so there's still hope for Democrats here, but the trends here are not it. It actually shifted about a point to the right in 2020 when you factor in national environment. It got a point bluer raw numbers, but since Biden won the popular vote by 2 more than Clinton did, it's a net shift of 1 to the right. So, Arthur, what are your thoughts on the 17th of Illinois?
I think the 17th is a really interesting district, mainly because I look at all of the seats that I have rated as a toss-up, and I think this is the one where Dems got the worst candidate recruitment. Um, Mainly that's because most of the seats that I have at toss-ups, Dems have an incumbent in. But Republicans have their candidate in Esther Joy King, and while she did lose a Trump seat in 2020, it was against Joe Bustos, who was a strong incumbent, and it's bluer down ballot. I think ultimately she put up a decent performance, considering that she was the heavy underdog, and only losing by, I think, 4 isn't a bad result at all. She's got as I said, she's got the primary locked up. She's already got the Congressional Leadership Fund buying ads for her and funneling money into that. Whereas the primary on the Dem side is a bit of a mess. You have, I think, maybe 2 or 3 lead candidates, but none of them are fundraising particularly well. And I think in this environment, yes, it's Biden +8, and yes, it's bluer down ballot, but you still need to be raising money. You still need to have that ground game. And in this seat, Democrats haven't gotten that. And I think as a result, I wouldn't be surprised at all if this seat flips, and it could flip maybe even by 4 or 5 points just because of the candidate quality being so poor on the Dem side.
I think 4 or 5 is a lot. I actually looked at this district. I've got it as a toss-up. Do you have it as Leonard or a toss-up?
I have this as a toss-up, but I think that I'm more bullish on candidate quality than most, and I think candidate quality here for Dems has been poor.
That's a fair argument. So here's my thing with this seat. If it's a Biden +8 seat, even though Biden, as we all know, didn't really do that well with white working class voters, you're still looking at a seat that he won by a pretty good amount. And so when the Illinois Dems drew this seat, they probably were thinking, okay, we won't win it by 8, but we'll win it by whatever in 2022, and we'll go from there. So fundamentally, if Democrats can do well in Rockford, Peoria, and Bloomington, they'll be okay here. If J.B. Pritzker, who have performed Clinton and Biden in the working class areas of the state in 2018, if Pritzker can overperform again in these areas in 2022, I think Democrats will be okay here. But again, the trends are really bad, and like you said, the Republicans are definitely beating Dems in candidate quality. So I'll give the seat, I'd say the GOP are narrowly favored, but it's still a Biden +8 seat. I wouldn't be stunned if just the partisanship just comes in, for the Democrats and gives them a 1 or, skin of their teeth type victory. So that's functionally a toss up. So then you've got Michigan 3rd, which is a seat that is very reliant on the primary. Arthur, do you want to talk about the primary there?
Yeah, you have Peter Meyer, who's the incumbent, fairly moderate, well-liked among sort of the conservative side of election Twitter, or at least sort of the non-Trumpy side. He's overperformed Trump last time. I think he won by 6 as Trump won by 4, but it's Grand Rapids, it's redder down ballot. And he is against a Trump-backed candidate, who many have suggested is too extreme for the seat, John Gibbs. He was a nominee, but couldn't actually get confirmed by the Republican-leading Michigan Senate because so many of the GOP state senators thought that he was a bad choice. I think it was for community planning or something like that. But he's been endorsed by Trump. We've not really had that much polling out of the race, but it did have Meyer with a lead. Although this is a seat where, of course, because Meyer did vote to impeach Trump, Trump's going heavily after him. So we won't know quite yet. I think if Meyer wins the primary, he wins the general. I think Dems have got a pretty good recruit in Hillary Shelton, who was the nominee last time. But I think if Gibbs ends up getting the nomination, that this could really be a rare flip across the night for Democrats. I think that if Gibbs won the primary, I'd maybe even move it to lean Democrat out of toss-up, whereas I think if Meyer wins, I'd probably move it the other way to lean Republican. But yeah, I think that, as you said, this seat is very reliant on the primary.
Yeah, I totally agree. Right now it stands as a toss-up. I'm assuming in both of our maps. If I think I'll be a little good to Democrats here. If Meyer wins the primary, he'll obviously give them a chance than John Gibbs. But I'm not going to move it to Lenar. I mean, it's still a Biden plus 8 seat. It's still a seat where Biden actually overperformed Gretchen Whitmer because the trends are just that good for Democrats here, which I think is pretty scary to someone like Peter Meyer. So, wouldn't be stunned if he wins again, but I'll have it as toss, even if he does win. But the second John Gibbs wins that primary, I'm moving it to lean Democrat. I don't see a path for Gibbs here. I don't see him doing well in Grand Rapids at all. He's just not the right fit. Like you said, he's just too extreme for the district in the eyes of a lot of voters. So I think that's what, helps the Democrats here. And yeah, Democrats might have a bad night. They probably will have a bad night. But if Gibbs gets the nomination, this will be one of the few flips we see. So we've got two more Michigan seats that we're going to talk about here, which are the 7th with Slotkin and the 8th with Dan Kildee. So I guess we're just going to play a little game here. Which of these seats do you think the Democrats have a better chance of winning, and why?
I think definitively the 8th. I think Kildee, that seat, it was won by Biden by more. I think it was Biden +2, whereas Slotkin's seat was Biden +1. Not that makes much of a difference. I think what does make more of a difference is down ballot. This is Flint. This is Tri-Cities. This is somewhere which is bluer down ballot. Peters, I think, outrun by a few points. Kildee outran Biden by a lot in 2020. And the Republican candidate here, who was thought to be the nominee, hasn't really ran that great of a campaign. He was the same person that lost the Trump seat to Alyssa Slotkin in 2020.
Oh, it's Paul Junge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think that I have it as lean D. I think that if Junge runs a similar campaign as he did against Slotkin, this will probably be a Kildee win 3-4 points. Whereas I think Slotkin's actually the underdog. I have it as a toss-up, but I think Barrett's, despite recently having a few controversies with fundraising texts that have backfired, I think that he's still a strong recruit. And because the environment is so bad for Democrats, and if it doesn't change, I think that he'll beat Slotkin. But I think many have made the comparison to the Guinta versus Carol Shea Porter races with Slotkin and Barrett, and I think that this is, if any seat ends up being that seat in this decade, it will be Michigan 7.
Yeah, I agree. The 8th is more likely to stay blue. Also, you might already know this, but I'm just going to say because I think it's really interesting. So, in 2016, this was a district that the 8th was a district Clinton only won by, I think, a point. And, the Kildee, again, to be fair, he wasn't really challenged, super harshly, but it's still worth saying he won by over 26. So he's certainly no performer. He's certainly, someone the Democrats can, I think, trust to do better in the seat than they might expect. And it's in a Biden seat. And I get that, if Biden would run for president in 2022, he'd definitely lose it by a fair amount. But, when you're looking at a race like this, when you're looking at a seat that would probably be, just R+3, R+4, if in a presidential election today, that to me, I think is a small enough margin for Kildee to run ahead of. Again, it's not ideal. It still functionally would be a Trump seat in all likelihood in 2024 or whatever. But to me, I think it's enough for him. I still have it as a toss-up. I'm not going to go as out there as you are with it being lean Democrat, but it's like you said, it's a more D seat down ballot. It's a seat that Democrats will generally run ahead of their presidential candidates. Peters ran ahead of Biden despite the fact that he ran behind statewide. So, yeah, wouldn't be stunned if Democrats hold it, but I think Slotkin's in a lot of trouble in the 7th. It's still a toss-up, but it's very close to Lenar. I wouldn't like be hesitant. Like if I use tilts on a house map, I definitely have it as Tiltar. She definitely loses when you put the gun to my head. So I do say that Slotkin loses, but Killy's really close. I think he's favored, but it's really tight there, especially with his candidate quality being better and Paul Jungay not being the best recruit for Republicans. So what about Ohio 1? What are your thoughts on that seat?
Shabbat Landsman. I think this is going to be really close. I think it's going to be closer than the others, the other two, the 13th and the 9th. It is down ballot R, and Shabbat did, I think, overperform Trump by 3 or 4 in 2020 against a fairly solid Dem candidate in Kate Schroeder. I think he's going to be boosted by having Mike DeWine on the ticket. I think Mike DeWine's going to win by double digits against, I think Nan Whaley wins the primary, but it could easily be John Cranley, in which this changes a little bit because, of course,
Cranley
was the mayor.
Better.
Because, of course, he was the mayor of Cincinnati. But I think Greg Lansman's a decent candidate, but again, it's red wave. It's our down ballot. It's got an incumbent who is fairly solid. I think that Republicans win.
I'm gonna disagree there. I think it's important to factor in the fundamentals for this seat. Again, it's still a toss-up. Like, by the way, when I say like I disagree with Arthur, it's literally by like 2 or 3 points because like the only things to talk about are toss-ups. So if it's like we're not gonna beef about a seat that he thinks is gonna go GOP by 0.5 and I think is gonna go Dem by 0.3. I just think like for me, the Cincinnati Democrats having a seat that they can contest for the first time in a while and having a seat in which the trends are pretty good for them, and especially with, I get that DeWine's going to do better in Cincinnati than Trump did, but like, if Democrats just do all right here, it's still a Biden plus 8 seat, and like, sure, it'll trend right, but like, it's a detrending area, and so unless the Republicans can like offset those trends, I don't think they win. So in my eyes, it's pretty close to lean D. It's closer to lean D than lean R. It's it's still a toss up, but like. I just fundamentally, I just think the Democrats just have the advantage here. I'd rather be the Democrats here than the Republicans, but again, you're looking at a seat that's going to be really close, anyways. So next up, we've got 2 more seats before we head out here. Pennsylvania 17 is the first. That's the seat Connor Lamb is vacating. Obviously, he's running for Senate. Probably going to lose that primary to John Fetterman, anyways. So kind of a waste of his time, it looks like, unless he, by some miracle, wins that primary and then loses to Dr. Oz. What do you think about this seat here? It's a Biden plus 6 seat, suburban Pittsburgh. Go.
I think it's a really interesting seat because I would have this in the Lean Democrat column if Connor Lamb ran again, but instead he's running for Senate and he's not running a good campaign at all. I think that he's going to be a distant second to Fetterman. But I also think that this is a pretty interesting race because neither Democrats nor Republicans got really a major, solid recruit here. So I think that this is up in the air. I think the Democrats, I know more about the Democrats candidate, Chris DeLuzia. I think that he's okay, but his fundraising was okay. But again, it's a toss-up race in a Biden midterm. I think that because it's Biden plus 6 and Pennsylvania is always quite close, even in midterms, it can tend to be quite close. It wasn't in 2018, but that's because you had 2 strong Dem incumbents running. I think gun to the head, I give him the benefit of the doubt and have it as him beating, I think, likely Republican candidate, I think at this point, is Jeremy Schaefer in the primary, who's I think Ross County or some word like that, commissioner. But I think that it's going to be close. I think if Connor Lamb had run again, as I said, this wouldn't really be as much of a conversation as it is as an open seat.
Yeah, I agree. If Lamb runs, Biden plus 6 probably wins it by 2 or 3. Without him, Don't really know. I don't actually know enough about the seat to like give you like an overview. I just think like Beaver County is going to be bad for Democrats. The portion of Allegheny that's in the district will be pretty good for them because it's pretty suburban, pretty. It trended a lot like northwest Allegheny trended towards Biden in 2020 and landed pretty well there as well, despite the fact that he outperformed expectations against Sean Parnell in that race. But without Lamb, it's a toss up. I don't really see a scenario in which the Democrats win it by more than two, but they're probably favored. I just like if things get really bad, like if Democrats manage to fall even more in Beaver County in the rural parts of the district, uh, yeah, they'll lose it, but like that's a tough expectation on them anyways. So it's a toss up, but I do think Democrats are favored there. Just a random question that came into my mind. Which seat do you think Democrats are more likely to hold? Michigan 8 or Pennsylvania 17?
Michigan 8. I think he has the incumbency. It is more Democrat down ballot, although it is 4 points redder by 2020 margin. I think Kildee is in a better shape.
Yeah, it's always better to have an incumbent. Not a bad call. I'd probably agree there. Okay, so our last seat that I've got on the board, and again, if you want to talk about any specific seat, we can do that too. But Virginia 2 with Elaine Luria, what do you got there?
I have it as lean Republican. I think Luria is in a lot of trouble. She's probably one of the most endangered Democratic incumbents that is running for re-election. I think Jennifer Kiggins is a real solid recruit. I know her fundraising initially wasn't much to be happy with, but yeah, I think that it's Virginia Beach. It's red down ballot. I think that despite Luria overperforming Biden in 2020, that was mainly because Scott Taylor had his scandals. Yeah, I think unless Jerome Bell somehow wins the primary, this will go Republican in November.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really actually know a ton about the demographics of this seat. Uh, Youngkin did really well in Virginia Beach, although as you said, it's pretty Republican down ballot. For it being a Biden seat in 2020. Although Biden did do really well in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake Bay, and he did quite well. That area in general, the general vicinity of Southern Virginia was quite blue in 2020. So, I don't see the Democrats winning this race. I have it as a toss up here, but like, it's probably the first seat that I moved from toss up to lean Republican just because Luria, performed. But like, you're looking at a seat that would be our favored in a neutral environment, and unless Luria, can overperform again, don't think that happens. So just fundamentally not the favorite right now. So then I've got one last question for you, and then you can bring up any last few seats if you want, and then we can wrap it up here. But the candidates for this question would be Iowa with Cindy Axne, Nebraska 2nd with Don Bacon, PA 7 and 8 with Susan Wild and Matt Cartwright. Which of the Trump seats are the Democrats most likely to hold, and why? Oh, and also Ohio 9 with Captor, if you want to throw that in too, but not want to.
Of all of them, I think Cartwright or Jared Golden.
Yeah, him too. My bad.
Yeah, I think Maine is weird. It's one of the few states that haven't broken their brains quite yet. They love ticket splitting. They also love their incumbents. I don't think Bruce Politican's a particularly strong candidate. If you're the first person to lose a seat in over 100 years as an incumbent, I think that does say something about you. I think Jared Golden I still have him as the underdog, but I don't think that I think this is a seat that easily could surprise me and go Democrat. I think Matt Cartwright, again, solid history of overperforming. Jim Bonnier, I don't think is a particularly strong candidate at all. I think his performance in 2020 was fine, but nothing special. And as I said, with the 17th, it's Pennsylvania is always pretty close. It's Pennsylvania. Again, I'd have him as the underdog, but I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls it out.
Yeah, I disagree on Golden. I think I got hammered on this when I had Scrimshaw on the show. He was not happy with my Golden take because I said Golden had a chance, and I think Evan was pretty big on Golden losing. I think I'll go with The closest seat would be it would be Iowa third, but like it just looks pretty bad for Democrats. I'll probably go with Cartwright here. Golden like Golden is just weird because it's like the element of surprise because obviously Susan Collins broke everyone's brains with her winning that election somehow, and so that's why I will never trust Maine ever again because that was of course the Senate race that I swung and missed on the most. I think I said Susan Collins was pretty much done like the weeks before the election. I would lose by like 5 or 6, and then she comes in wins by 9, and I was like, all right, I'm done with you, Maine. So I'm not gonna like say Golden's done because I don't want to make the same mistake I made 2 years ago, but uh, I've got him at lean Republican, which is pretty generous anyways, considering it's a Trump seat in a pretty Republican midterm. But yeah, Golden wouldn't stun me, but again, I wouldn't say outright that he would be the best pick here. So do you have any seats you want to talk about before we head out?
I think that the one seat that I think we disagree on the most is Washington's 8th, that you have as lean Democrat and I have as a toss up, but honestly, I'm pretty close to putting this as lean Republican.
Ooh.
Yeah, I don't think that Kim Scry is particularly a strong incumbent. She's underperformed Biden by, I think, 2 or 3, which, yeah, it's a redder seat down ballot, but Jesse Jensen, who is running again this time, I don't think was a particularly good candidate at all. I think that Reagan Dunn is a stronger candidate. And while his first quarter fundraising wasn't amazing, and Schreier's actually was a solid haul, I think that this is a seat that's pretty susceptible to reversion. If we do see some suburban reversion, it will be in areas like the King County suburbs. Yeah, I think that Dunn probably wins. But again, I can see this sort of similarly to Michigan's 7th being a seat that does sort of go back and forth throughout the decade.
So the reason that I have this seat as lean D is because I actually disagree with what you said about this seat being most susceptible to a suburban reversion. And so I think the Democrats are going to be fine here. And I say that because you're looking at an area that's had a bunch of, more liberal California, New York transplants with people moving out of those bigger cities for Democrats. Obviously not, not going to paint the narrative that everyone's moving out of California because it's a false narrative. But like it, there are still a lot of more liberal relocators moving to, Seattle and that area in general. So you've got that mostly white college educated voters are going to not really see a turnout drop in 2022. If if the GOP wins this seat, it'll just be because they got enough Biden voters to switch and vote for or against Kim Schreier. But I don't see that happening right now. It could change. I'll have to get more polling. We'll have to see what Washington is like. But I think the reason that Schreier underperformed Biden in 2020 was because Biden did so well here, and because of Lauren Culp doing all right here against Jay Inslee. He ran for the Republicans in that gubernatorial election. He overperformed Trump by a little bit? Obviously, nothing special, but he did. Win Clallam County. He still did kind of well around Seattle, anyways. And so, he I think was kind of what boosted the GOP here. Again, it's probably the shakiest of my lean Democrat races, but
of all of them, I think Cartwright or Jared Golden.
Again, you're looking at a seat that I think will stay Democrat because it's just so college educated and so affluent in terms of the voters you're seeing here for the Democrats. But yeah, it's again, I wouldn't be stunned if it flips. Wouldn't be stunned if it's super close, but I'm comfortable enough putting it in Democrats' narrowly favor. So again, Arthur, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It was really good talking to you about having you educate our viewers on the UK and talking about the house map. Again, if you enjoyed the show, go follow Arthur on Twitter at Garton Arthur. I enjoy his tweets. I think they're pretty funny. I think you will also find them funny. He also, I think, provides pretty good coverage of, politics in general. He'll, not gonna lie, when I first saw the New York map got overturned, I just clicked on his profile and was like, oh yeah, he quote tweeted it. Okay. So if you want updates on politics and if you enjoy this podcast, go follow Arthur on Twitter at Garton Arthur. If you enjoyed this podcast, as well as that, you could follow me on Twitter. I'm at Ryan Jakubowski. You can read my writing at upyt.substack.com. You can view my YouTube channel. Click the link in my bio. Just read my stuff. If you're on Spotify, share the podcast. If you are on YouTube, like the podcast, do whatever you want. Any last closing thoughts?
Not particularly. Thank you so much for having me on, Ryan. It's been great.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. You're welcome to come back anytime you want. Thank you so much for listening, and from the West Coast and from the United Kingdom, thank you. Goodbye.